As you open that up, so
Yeah, I brought a few others on the show.
just to kind of jog the memory.
Who these people are. Before your time.
You know,
Famous Welch.
what I remember is, and I wasn't at the meeting, so it's not firsthand, but he had said something in a team where he just had gotten so frustrated with Patty and himself and things that one time he just wanted to shoot the both of them or something, and you know, people didn't quite know how to handle that, if he was just really joking or if he really, you know, was a screw loose or what was happening. So, well, again, as I told Roger, you know, I've worked here since '80, but my best part to all of this would just be some names for you guys and maybe some other stories to, you know, to look at.
Yeah, you're quite the rookie.
Oh, I would think with John Beckleen and Norbert, you're looking at quite a few years, you know, back. Norbert had started, what, about 56 or
He
later?
actually started about 63.
Well, here, I suppose part of his career was, yeah, where, Faribault or St. Peter or wherever,
Yeah,
like Owasso, wherever he was coming from. But I do have, you know, a few other names and other things, but I do have the form also.
Ah,
Fabulous.
Yeah, and I don't know, in looking at it again, that there was anything that was, but this is a person that might be of interest.
Ann Wick Custer.
Yep. One of the stories she had told to me was being in Boswell and McBroom. I think I told you this. And the buildings were empty. They had just been built there in the mid-50s and awaiting the Faribault buses to come in, and you know, that mass of people, and you've got a building that's completely empty one minute and you know,
200.
well, yeah, there's a list, and I suppose go right, go left, you know, I suppose they had distributed them by male, female, if they could walk or wheelchair or whatever. But she had worked as a AGS and a Knights, and I bet you in a few other things too.
Yeah,
And she's only here a couple weeks longer, and she heads to Arizona. That's why I wanted to make sure if you decide to talk with her.
Okay. Have you talked to her so she knows you're doing this, or would it be a...
No, I talked to Colleen, my office mate, that's her mother-in-law, and I was coming over and I said, you know, is there anybody you can think of? And she mentioned a couple names, and I said, well, Ann's there, how much longer? She said about 2 weeks, so I would think Ann would really like something like that. And of course, she married the doctor out here. He was kind of famous in his own right.
Yeah.
His daughter was, I think, the first female state Supreme Court justice, if I remember correctly. So anyway, enough of my...
All right, well, that's about it then, if you filled out the form.
Well, you get a camera in there, and then you feel a little nervous, and, like it is an investigation.
Well, I was originally telling people, don't worry, we're just gonna put these things on a shelf for, no one will ever see them, but I
Good.
decided, well, maybe someone would like to see them, or at least little pieces of them, just as a...
Well, especially those with real historical significance.
Well, like John's stories were fascinating.
Well, but just how he tells the story
Yeah,
is
he's a
great.
really good
Yeah.
storyteller.
I probably have him tell that story from the bridge story, you know, from the you know, the way the sun glistened on a knife. I mean, I've had him tell that story maybe 4 or 5 times. Probably the last 4 or 5 times I've seen him. It's just great. And it always does stay the same. And you kind of wonder sometimes, so.
No, I think that is burned into his memory.
Mhm.
I think there's no doubt about it.
And for John, you know, as you'd go over the bridge, if you just kept going another half mile, you're right to his house.
Yeah, we actually met him at his house.
He even tried to purchase the land across from here that they farmed when it went up for sale, but I think it actually went to the park, which probably worked out even better. But he tried to purchase it so it would be adjoining his land.
This is the bridge.
Well, I've never seen a picture of the bridge.
Here's the larger, they just blew it up and over the corner.
Now,
That's exactly where it is, right under the power plant.
if I have one claim to fame, I believe I've walked this campus more than any other person. And the reason I say that, and I have been able to find the exact spot that the bridge went across, which it took me a while.
I
But
suppose the level of water makes a difference too.
well, that, and actually the easiest part is the way the fence is set up, it appears that that's where it was. Now, the fence could be newer.
Well, now you can tell, I mean, in this case, that's the power plant, so you
Mhm.
can tell exactly where it's.
Yeah, and the fence, if you should ever walk down there,
You should do that sometime.
it is neat. There's a great walk if you go out from the new, well, in fact, you can go right there and drop down. There is a little spot, it's a little steep for about 15 feet
But you can get here with, going by the
through the fence.
root cellar
Yep.
and down and onto that path that goes.
Which is really neat. When my kids and I would used to walk down here, I'd tell them that somebody had buried $1 million. They think it was under this thing, and it looks the part. And of course, is the missing air conduit to the barn that's still up out by Fish Lake. The barn is still up there. And that was one I told Norbert that he didn't realize the barn was still standing.
Where is that?
When you go, when you're going past, when you turn onto Highway 2, and you start towards Stark, right where the county line ends, about 2 miles down, you hit the corner and you can either go the back way to Scoman, or you can go to Rush Point Store. You don't go to either, you go up the hill, and there's where Sue Carew lives, and as you go up the hill, there's gonna be a big pond to your left, and if you look straight across that pond, there's gonna be an old barn. And especially now in the fall and the winter, with the leaves opening up, you just look straight across that pond immediately when you get to the pond.
Is
And the barn
kind
would
of
be-
smaller lake?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and now a few new houses have built up, and there's like some docks and stuff, but it's straight across, and you'll know it right away when you see it. This time of year, it's a little harder to see because there's enough trees up, but there's one of the air, whatever you call those, missing, and that's down at the bottom of the hill.
I'm actually
So-
living in one of those new houses, right?
Well, you are, is it the one with the dock that goes out to it?
Nope, it's right next to the one at the dock.
Okay, neat. Well, Sue,
No, is it Paul, is it near Paul Z's then? Or-
which one is Paul Z's?
Well, that's Sue's parents, they live over that direction, but I'm not sure exactly where. You don't know the name of the person that is though.
No, but Sue has got the messy place.
Yeah.
Sorry, but that's right at the top with the horses
big
and stuff.
horses.
You know exactly what I mean. And it was probably,
Paw Kell.
it looks that way. And she said, when I asked her about it, realizing that's who had moved it, she said what? Her uncle had
Oh,
moved
okay.
the barn to her dad's place?
Well, that's what I'm wondering,
Yeah.
because I know
Yeah.
he lives very close to her, west of that, I think it's west, yeah, of that road.
What was Sue's last name?
It's Sue,
Carew,
thank you.
C-A-R-E-W.
Correct, just like Rod Carew. And I don't know why the barn and that side of it generates so much curiosity, but it's neat. I guess for me, in hearing the old stories, it ended the old days of when so many people were out here and had the seizures and things. And about the time that barn went out of existence is about the time the seizure meds came in, and the place, it was kind of like the landmark, everything kind of switched at that time.
The early 60s, end of the era of
The working, the farmers, and, maybe you told me the story, or Norbert did, about when they sold the horses and the tractors and everything, that, the guys that were left at that time were crying, big, farming type
John
guys.
McLean actually mentioned that too, about how sad they were when the farm closed. How most of those folks left right around the same time.
Probably good they did, because can you imagine working the fields every day, and now those guys just kind of sitting around? There wasn't a lot of work, that kind of work to be done.
How did they move the barn,
Well, Sue could tell you that better. Her dad or uncle was somebody that I think maybe did it for a job or a sidelight, and so she could tell you that. I asked, I think we talked briefly about it, and I think she'd love to, either get her dad involved or talk about it herself.
Yeah. And the house was moved too, and that.
Went to a different spot.
Different spot, yeah.
Like
It's
Randy?
Quite a distance. Yeah, it's towards Rush City, on the Grand Road.
And there still is some footings out there. Again, I used to be the night OD, and so every night, even in the winter, I try to walk the campus. I lived close by, so for whatever reason, this was always a great place to walk to. Even now, if we've got a break or whatever, I like to walk through. And, it's just a great spot. And there's not a lot down by the river, but there was one great story from maybe the 50s or so when a client here had dug out a spot on the banks here, and he'd walk across, I believe, the bridge, and I don't know if he'd steal, borrow, or whatever things to put in his pad, I guess.
Shanty or
Yeah.
shack
And didn't he have maybe a few female clients down there or whatever? But I mean, this is
entertained a little.
well, this is way back into a different era when some had they could be off campus or whatever. So I thought I had found that spot because you can walk all the way to the city park from down here, and I thought I'd found a spot, but somebody else told me that it should have been further behind either Cottage 12 or whatever.
Cupola, that's what those things are called, on the top of the barn.
That's what it is?
Cupola.
I should write that down.
Cupola.
I guess I should let you see if there's other things that you've got, or...
I didn't know you stayed in the dorm.
I lived on the dorm. That was still happening in '80. I think they ended that shortly after.
So you were an employee, a new employee.
As a new employee, and I didn't have a place to live till May 1st, so that week I lived in the dorm. And at the time, there was two people. There was another guy that was interning, and he left about that same time. And then Sister Ann had her own place,
In the basement.
her own apartment down below. And so for the next couple years or so, she was the only person, that lived there more than just, a week.
She lived there permanently.
She lived there permanently and had her own apartment and worked with a client in the same building I was in, Cottage 11, or what's now Oakview, that's still standing. And she worked with him for, another year or two, so. And then, of course, had that sad ending, but.
Yeah, which damned me to hell for all time, probably. I had to fire him on.
Oh.
So,
One of my small claims to fame.
it's
An old nun.
an old nun that didn't last long after that. I think it pretty much was the ending for her.
Yeah,
So yeah.
it's another whole story. We'll go into that another time.
The other, just an interesting story was the time, there's two things. One would be the strike in '81, and then the other is that finding a guy about 7, 8 years ago in Maine at about midnight when I was the OD. But, do you interest in either one, or?
Yes.
So did you work during the strike, or were you?
You were in Cottage 11 during that time, or not?
I was actually in the administration building.
Okay.
I had the night shift. I had the 12 midnight to 12 noon shift.
Over here?
In the administration.
Okay.
But I made rounds every night to all the buildings, so, or morning, so I saw those shifts through.
I worked the 7 to 7 the first day. I don't know if I'm a little bit over, or I guess I prefer to not be on there, but how close are we?
Looks good.
Shoot.
Looks as good as it can.
During the strike in '81, it started in the summer, and that was the first strike ever by state employees, and there's been one since, but this was the first strike. And so that was interesting. And when I got there at 7 o'clock to work a 12-hour shift, and obviously they didn't have enough staff, and I'm sure they tried to think it out, but most of the facility was gone, and we only picked up a few people from central office. But I got there at 7, and Sue Carlson, who still works in town, I get there at 7, and she says 2 words, and it was "I'm sorry," she's crying, and she handed me the keys, and she was gone. So what had happened was, and I found out later, until 5 o'clock was herself and another staff, and then that person was done and had worked 12 hours, and I'm sure was very tired. And so she had 24 clients, and a number of these people were wheelchair people with high needs.
High needs, profoundly retarded.
Exactly. And so I got in at 7 and she left, and I surveyed what we had, and we had, a big mess. But, again, Sue, I'm sure, very conscientious person, had done everything she could. So I started, I looked through, and we still had people, unfortunately, some on commodes, some had gotten done eating, other were in the recreation room, some were just kind of milling around. And so I started at whatever end, probably in the commode area, getting those guys dressed, and gals. It was co-ed at that time, and getting them dressed, and even though it was early probably for bed, but probably started in that way, or in the living room area, and started at one end. And when I got done with all 24, I started over again, because virtually all those people were now wet, and just started going. And there was a runner back then, a lot better shape, and so it was my idea that I was going to get that all done and up to date. And when I turned the keys over at 7 a.m., I had basically, for the first time, got even. It was just a very interesting, 24 clients like that was, just an incredible night of work, and the state got its,
Got its money's worth out of it.
It sure did. And then after that, it got better with each night. And any strike in, the first day is going to be the worst. And then more staff started coming in. And within 3 days, it really was going very well. But that first day was a bugger. And, you could just tell, again, by the look on Sue's face, that it had been very, very overwhelming. And
Didn't it turn out that she was pregnant at the time also? And she was put on reduced hours shortly after that.
I think you're right, Roger. And so, there's that added piece. But, and of course it's easier at night, people are sleeping and things like that. But, it just was, incredible night.
It lasted 21 days.
It did.
It seemed longer.
And with the name I handed you, at about 5 in the morning, near the end of it, we watched Princess Di get married live. It was quiet at that point, and Ann Wick, Kusky, and myself had watched that live. And that was very near the end of the strike. And there was some other stuff that happened during that time. I think there was some vandalism.
It was a kind of a nasty strike.
Yep.
There were picket lines out on the road, and every vehicle was stopped and searched coming onto campus.
And some vehicles ended up being damaged.
There ended up being a lot of roofing nails thrown on the road. There were a lot of flat tires.
Mm-hmm.
There were tires slashed. See, temporary help was hired, which were called scabs,
Mm-hmm.
and they were not linked.
There wasn't many, but there was enough that
They lived in the dorm, so they wouldn't have to cross those picket lines.
And that might have been one of the last times the dorm was really used in any way, shape, or form.
I think it is.
There was.
And on the last night, they really celebrated.
Well, I believe, and this is an interesting point, I believe that this campus held the strongest union presence in that. I think the number was just several, whereas in Fergus, the union president and others had walked across the line within a week or so.
I think it was only 2 that crossed the line here.
I was going to say 2 or 3, and I could think of.
Yeah, it was very, very few that crossed.
Yep. And so I believe that they had kept the strongest percentage by far of any of the facilities out there. So that was, kind of an interesting thing. So.
But there was a real esprit de corps that developed of the people that worked. I mean, it really became much closer personally, and great food.
Oh, I was thinking of people on the lines, but you're right. The people here was.
I think there was a lot of bonding that would never have happened for professional staff, and saw them in whole different lights.
Exactly, and even though you had kind of a difference opinion once we got back together, I think there was that. We had bonding of the direct care and other people that were out on the lines, and then you had that for the people that were working here. And, working with clients in many different ways, and, I normally would never have taken care of that many clients and direct care, those kind of things could be really good, so. And you know what, the strike from just a few years ago was interesting in its own right. They had decided to go 24 hours and had fires going, and it reminded me as I worked the old Civil War camps, that could see each side.
Sentinels.
Yep, so, I could almost show you exactly where, because a couple times I would stop and have a pop with them afterwards, but yeah, they had the fires going 24 hours a day on each end, by each gate, and, again, kind of an interesting time. Both had their, a whole different feel.
But not nearly as negative or hostile.
No, what did we have? Did we have any people you really call scabs? No, we had the National Guard.
Yeah.
And a good ending story.
I think there were a couple that worked nights or something that might have crossed. But
Well, there is a neat little story there. I don't know if it's anything to use, but the National Guard had the first bar on campus. Because they were their own entity, they could, on a state facility, declare that a post, which they had in McBroom, and they did. And they had a few drinks, and one night one of the guardsmen that thought he had been questioned as he drove in a little, too strongly, decided to throw a couple apples at, I think, our union president or vice president's vehicle, damaging it slightly. And a number of union people then chased this guardsman down and caught him. And he was somewhat inebriated, and I think that went to the post commander or whatever, and I think that knocked out their bar, ended after that time, and reprimanded the young fella, and so.
yeah, little tension.
Little tension.
But they were pretty civil letting cars come in.
Yeah, I think overall it was good when you're considering that it's a person's livelihood, and some strikes in other areas have caused, a lot of damage. People did pretty well with it. The 81 strike, I decided instead of my vehicle, I rode in every day and would talk to the people on the lines, and they seemed to appreciate that. And
You're not sneaking anybody in your trunk.
no, I don't think so. And of course, the first day, Marlene Biggins turned to me and said, "I heard 3 clients died last night." And, I suppose that kind of propaganda, that hope, not that people died, but that hope that things were going badly and they'd break and have to pay us a better wage. But I said, "No, Marlene, I think they're doing pretty good. The first night was pretty tough." And, but I remember her saying that, "I heard 3 people had died." Not 1 or 2, but 3.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. No, those were,
2 strikes.
and we're not out yet. 3 strikes.
3 strikes and we're out.
I'm sorry.
Just a quick one for you was the night I found somebody in Maine. I worked nights about 7 to 9 years ago. I worked for nights for 2 years. I was the night supervisor. And outside of some interesting blizzards and other things that happened, we had an alarm in one of the buildings, a fire alarm, and I had to reset the board. It meant going over to Maine in the middle of the night, and it's always kind of a dark, creepy place, and some people thought there had been, a ghost, if you believed, some of the early people that get there early in the morning to clean the place. And whenever you'd go in there at night, it'd be strange anyway, because the lighting, to get to the next light, and I didn't always know where the switches were, but so when I'd come around to get to the switchboard to turn that off, there was glass around the switchboard, and before you could get to a light, you'd always see a shadow in that glass anyway, and you'd always be thinking there was somebody there. So right before I get to that switchboard, I'm steps away, in fact, I'm just going to make my turn. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw somebody standing in front of the vending machines. So I backed up and looked around the corner, and there was a guy. It's about midnight. Everybody had left, many, many hours before.
Rolling locked up tight?
Yeah, it's a big building, and there he is, standing there at the vending machine, and I noticed he was swaying a bit. So I figured, I should have just called the police right away, but when I saw that he was swaying, I waited a minute or so, about 30 seconds. And finally I thought, well, probably not the best thing to do, but I'll just try to engage him, stay back. He immediately ran for one of the other areas, and that, of course, was locked. So then I kind of stayed way back, and I said, well, you know what? The only way out is where I came through. I'll show you where it is, and I stayed way ahead of him. And so I did that, and as we got to the front door, and he's a little ways behind me, or the back door, he just takes off running. And so then I had walking the switchboard area at night and told him to call the police. And as I followed from a distance, he ran to the back door of Oakview South, and the police were there a few minutes later. But in the meantime, and he was very tired now, he looked pretty safe. I asked him, who he was, and he had been a client from the 70s, probably about 75, 77. You probably knew the name, I can't remember it anymore. And he had decided that he wanted to see the place again. So he took a taxi up from the Twin Cities to the Bar and Grill, had a couple pitchers, was now out of money. It's close to midnight. Figured, well, my best bet is to walk over to the old campus, look around. He broke in. First door in Maine he got to, after he broke through the window, was locked, so he had to re-break out, go on to another window, break in there, and had been looking for stuff. The part that was kind of interesting the next day is they found two knives that he had found. One, the big chopping knife that's about this big, the blade that gets, I think he was just looking for protection. He didn't seem to be a particularly violent person or anything. But they found a couple knives, one laying by the business office door where you could get in more money, and the other was somewhere in the deli area, probably looking for food or whatever. And they housed him in what was the extra jail area at the time, the little motel. Had those apartments kind of in the back, and they put him in there and let him go the next day. So,
How old was he?
I'm just going to guess and say he was 40. He was still old enough he could run, but it had been quite a few years he'd been in. And he remembered a few names out here and actually seemed to think of it as kind of the good old days. And I told you this once, Roger. Suzanne Posternich, the dentist's wife, had told me a story. I'd come on to an OD about 10 years ago. It was kind of a troubling story in that the guy, it was a female, had come to her about 10 years ago and returned and had said, I really would like to see McBroom. And, Suzanne said, well, we don't really do tours on the weekend, but again, this person was really kind of troubled and really needed to see him. So she took the client back to McBroom, and they went through, where the eating area was, and had told a story how she lived there in the early 60s, and her best friend, she didn't know what had happened to her. They had taken her out and had asked for days, and finally had found out that this other girl had died from some illness, but they thought it would trouble her too much to tell her the story, so didn't. And when she finally found out, it had really bothered her. But we've had a number of people that have returned. I guess you would expect that, and kind of look back. And some seem to be happy with those days. Other, felt like maybe those days were taken away from them, or weren't so good. But I guess most that had returned seemed to be more favorable. One was one day when I was told to get the keys and go to the cemetery with a couple of old gals, and they hadn't been here to see the gravesite for their sister since before World War II. So that, of course, puts them into the 30s, and remembered this small tree, and you can figure out what happened next. The tree, I've got an old map, and it's hard to figure out, but we're getting close, and we come to this tree that's now, it was like 50 years later. I suppose it was, she maybe was gone in maybe 36, and this was probably about 96 or 94 or so. And we were able to find behind it, and they were real happy about that. And, you know, that seemed to, you know, help out. But we have a number of people that, you know, that return.
And think of the numbers that appear, I mean, just in sheer numbers.
Well, we would have that number, right? Do they keep I mean, our number in our log, is it up to date
And I
to the
wonder if it
number?
is. I wonder if it is, so that you could figure out exactly how many people have come through the doors. That would be an interesting question. Yeah.
I had also asked, and I don't know as far as the privacy thing, but we had a client here that started in the state hospital system, Jeremy, I'll just give you the first name, and then stayed through the MEDO program that's here now. And he had a real interest in history, so first myself and then Steve Boland and a couple other staff helped him do a video, a history of the facility. And it was interesting, we had just moved out of Oakview, it had just been emptied, so we went through there, and we got permission to go through the nurses' dorm, the maid, the dietary, and talk to Norbert Johnson from the Historical Society. And during the whole time, Jeremy did verbal kind of dubbing or whatever. And it was very interesting to get it from a client's perspective, one that had been through, the state hospital system, regional center, through the MEDO. And when the cemetery was dedicated or rededicated here a couple of years ago, he gave just a tremendous speech that he had worked on. And I don't know if either of you were there, it was the first one of the two. And actually, somebody from Community Ed and a couple of people had asked him if they could see the finished product. And what was too bad is, and I think he has it, he left a little bit sooner than he thought. He wasn't able, I think he ended up leaving those films here. He ended up coming back and he ended up, I think, getting those. But I don't think he ever had a chance to edit and put it all together. But he maybe had 5 to 7 hours.
Wow.
And I was thinking, just throwing it out at you, it'd be what a great either ending or just a piece in there about, that whole dedication of the cemetery. His speech was brilliant. His video stuff would be I think very good, especially when you get something from a client perspective. And he was loved the history of the place. Whenever we talk about it, he would just, and then he decided to do this video thing. I mean, it was 100% himself. And I may have put his name down there on first name last. It might be something about the cemetery, I think.
Speech at the cemetery.
Do you know how to get all of them?
I don't, but yeah, I bet you Mark Stovlin could do that because he came back to a different building and he left from there, or Connie O'Brien. And I would think the big thing there is to make sure, as you know, to go through the right channel so the privacy side. But he would love it, and I only say that because he wanted to continue on, he wanted to connect with community ed, he wanted to, anything he could, and he was, it's great his perspective on it, good or bad.
It's
his perspective, he tells it like it is, and
this is going to sound great on the videotape.
well, again, it's part of all our changes out here.
Yes.
So redoing the roads and taking out the buildings and everything else, so.
What do you think of all the changes then?
Well, the change has been for the best. And, yes, on the one side, it might be scary in that you see your livelihood might be gone and, you've got this training. But, most people, especially at this facility, seem to be forward thinking and we're looking at, the best to get to the community, smaller settings, things like that. And I think it's tremendous.
How did you feel when the building started?
Well, I hated that. I mean, I know people that believe buildings, mean nothing. They're not human, and I agree with that. But you think of, again, good and bad, all the things that have happened, and the uses that could have been done, and mattered if it could have been a great college setting or whatever. It was tough. I hate to see that. Again, as somebody that's walked this campus so many times, over the 25 years. I've always been a walker, and, this is a great place to go. And,
Tunnels included?
oh, the stories in the tunnels, sometimes I'd even turn the lights off just to kind of scare yourself a little bit. Now, I didn't do that often, because a lot of people were really freaked out by the tunnels.
Yes.
I loved them. At one point, our group that promoted fitness, what was our fitness group, do you remember? But they even had,
Wellness
well,
committees?
they even had the mileage listed from each door, so you could run. I saw people bike down there. I saw our nurse use both a bike and a roller skates to get from building to building. It was a big campus.
Yep.
And I remember, seeing those people down there. When the college was on campus for a very short time, I saw a group running through the tunnels. I several times had to assist, other people. One Christmas day, my first year here in 80, I was done with my shift and had decided to run in the tunnels. It was a cold day, and ended up assisting somebody from Cottage 9 that their client had become unmanageable, and jumped in and helped and got them back to 9. But yeah, I would even come in and walk the tunnels, run the tunnels when I wasn't working. Great winter place to go.
Yeah.
But a bit scary and eerie, and those pipes would rattle sometimes out of nowhere, and you'd jump big time.
Yeah.
And many people were
You
really
saw the
scared.
gates?
Now the gates that were on the what?
Pretty well, Maine was kind of the center, and then anything south.
The gates would come up, yep, after a
South.
certain time.
At a certain time, so that the men and the women would be separated, so that there wouldn't be tunnel access between the men and the women.
And the gates were still up for quite a few years. One of the fascinating things about the campus was, and this was before my time, and Roger, I don't know when it ended, but the campus used to be segregated between male and female. How did it go? Which side was male?
South was male.
South was
North
male.
was female.
So,
And never the twain
shall
meet
meet.
except at the auditorium under very close supervision. For a movie or a dance or something like that.
When you look at the old pictures, you see the facility, how segregated, or how, it was almost like the river went between it, which instead of being over here. And it had everything, its own, basically its own theater. They used the gym, and they had a great projection set up there, and they had their own they had their own beauty shop, and dental, an incredible dental area. And one of the people that may have been neat to interview, I noticed one of the first women to go through dental school in Minnesota, and had organized a dental shop as it is right now. From 55 to 75, I think was her years.
Dr. Esther King.
Very good. And when I asked the dental gal, even now, Julie Stromberg, who would also be a good person, she's got about 35 years in, she had said she remembered Dr. King.
Yes, I remember her quite well.
Yeah, but she had quite a history, and unfortunately had just passed away. I think she was like 95 years old. The history of the place is incredible. Ruth Duchek had a couple incredible stories. One was her first few days here, and she's on a search to find a client, and she's in the group, and the client had drowned behind the area behind the pond that was behind the jail now. I guess it would be part of that. And I think the guy swam out and brought her in, but obviously the person had died. And Ruth wanted to quit work right then and there, and called Mom back in Glenwood, and she said, "Oh no, you're not letting, stuff happens." And then of course the other story would have been in 14 when she was the unit director, and was Christmas Day, and the one client, everybody had gone down to eat the brunch except for the two wanted to sleep in, and when they got back up, the one had beat up the other, beat him to death. Strangled him. Okay.
With the belt.
Is that what it was? Okay. They never knew if he'd taken his blanket. I don't know what the speculation was there. I didn't work in that building, but again, like any city.
Char Reiner had a bag of evidence up in the records room. I think until the building was demolished. It probably was demolished with the building, just she could never figure out what to do with it.
Well, like
He
any.
had the belt, and
like any city, we've
She
had,
still have the belt?
Yeah, sealed bag of evidence. But he ended up going to St. Peter's Security Hospital, as I recall.
was John able to give you some background in that day and still visiting the other guy that ended up going to St. Peter? Well, that was good. But like any city, we've had, deaths and investigations and, they've had it all.
Thefts, large thefts from the business office.
I was one of the names that was listed on there, and it's because I was a recreation therapist, and would request money a number of times, and then found out that was one of the names that had been forged. And I think, they were able to prove maybe around 25,000, but figured that it was probably twice that amount.
Who did the forging?
Betty Chapman was her name.
And who was she?
She was a business office person.
And, so there's that.
So she ended up doing time, and I don't know if there was
You know
some
what?
restitution. No, I don't really remember.
Well, and I think it ended up being more probation and restitution than the actual
Yeah, I think that's right.
time.
Yeah.
But, you've got that, and of course, the infamous, the Delwood incident, and how reliable or not that was from, the person that had made, I believe, virtually all the accusations.
So you were relatively new when that.
Well, I started in 80, and that happened in what, about
82?
82? Yep. And so I was new, and that was probably the hardest time to work up here, because, again, most people did, a very good job. And like any other place, there's bad apples or whatever, but it wasn't a prevalent thing by any means. But that made it tough, because people would ask you about that, and made you feel like your work was, terrible or whatever, where I never saw it that way. I guess State Hospital, even the name still invokes for some people, bad.
Stigma.
Yeah, definite stigma.
Well, it made the state papers, the Minneapolis paper, front page, big headline, 7
Huge.
at Cambridge for abuse.
Well, and the abuse reasons, I think, to this day make it even more unique, so.
Yeah, yeah. And we still have some of those in place who were hired back and are on campus here today.
We do, and one's good staff, and didn't seem to be any doubt of her innocence, and I think would be, if you decide to go with that route, would be an interesting person to talk with, because I think she would enjoy her chance to kind of set from the other side, just like the client. And I think it'd be great perspective, that whole idea of being put under an incredible microscope, and was actually fired.
Yes.
Now is our vice president of the union or whatever on campus, and was very integral to getting this MEDO facility here, things like that. So that, of course, is a big piece, however you decide to do, decide.
Well, we decided how to approach that, because it's pretty contemporary, And
People still working here.
It's very similar to all of the reorganizations and different administrations that came in, and some of them have very negative effects on the campus, but how do you word that so that you try to maintain your objectivity?
Well, just my thought would be, just a quick thought, would be to interview the staff person that's here, and see how that tone goes, and just see if you get some interesting thoughts on what direction. Because knowing her, I think you might get the whole story right there. And so how about utilizing that as your way of expressing it or whatever.
That one is easier than like the Ken Gossett.
Mm-hmm.
You were to cover that, but Mike Tessner, who of course is still
Mm-hmm.
in the system, a big part of the system.
Well, and then at one point our CEO, Mr. Balk, was not only here, but
Multi-institution.
yep, and there was some issues that came down the road for him later. He left the state, and so Yeah, it's, it's got political climate, it's intrigue,
Everything a good story should have.
scandal, it's got everything. And I think it's got a good ending, actually, in that the facility has maintained a presence and it works with some very tough clients, but in the end, getting those people back into the community and especially people in as much crisis as they're in. So, I think a number of people scattered to the wind, clients, staff, buildings, the whole works, but there still is a presence and people that were trained, well trained, have been able to keep working in this side. So I think it's worked out good for everyone.
And eventually retire to...
Retire like Roger Anderson here, to write a life of leisure, to write books and travel the world and bring in some of the great music, world music, right into Cambridge. So there was a plug.
We gotta show you a picture I found. I love this picture. Foster grandparents.
That is a tremendous picture, and so
It could be our cover.
That isn't a picture either.
interesting for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
It must. So is this 4?
It's gotta be 4.
Because this is be the parking lot
I mean,
of 8, and there should be there should be still one more building back there. So
it's too close to be 6.
now, quick note about Cottage 4, because every time you bring up a building, there's a different story. There actually was a dorm here for college students for a short time. The college was on campus a very short time.
Cambridge campus?
Yeah.
And Jim Schonecker, Dutch Schonecker, has wrote, I think, a couple books about history in the area, Iceni County history or whatever. His son was the head of this dorm and had a couple good stories about having to throw out one guy one morning because he was obnoxious or whatever, had been there with a female visitor or whatever the case was. But anyway, that Cottage 4 was the college dorm. It was patterned after a program that Fergus Falls, I think, still uses to this day, where you could live in room and board for like 10, 15 hours of work.
Volunteer.
I kind of missed the little tunnel things, of course. I can't tell if that was it or if that's actually, looks like it's maybe just some flowers. But people walking through would always wonder about the bunkers. I don't know if you've ever seen, is there any, they're all gone now.
I think
Last
they're all...
month's finally gone.
Yep.
The bunkers that look like great places just to sit down, benches and stuff. So.
They're actually... They have glass on them to like natural level.
Now, do you know?
No, I'm gonna check with Bunny Evans.
Okay.
And find out.
Did you find that in her scrapbook, or where'd you find that?
I found that, remember that big box of pictures I showed you that I haven't sorted yet with slides and all that stuff?
That's a great shot.
It is, isn't it?
That's a great shot. That's the neat thing about bringing out pictures. It reminds you of other stories, no matter if it was the college campus that was here.
Since you know Fergus Falls, I have to show you the plate I have.
Well, okay, same great stories here, at least it is for me. You might not think so.
Mitch is from Fergus.
My brother lives at the end of the lake, the house right about here. Because many times, this is like walking the lakes down in Minneapolis. I mean, it's the focal point of Fergus Falls. And so as you walk this lake, it's about a mile around. You'll see people at 3 in the morning, anytime. So I've looked many ways at times, and my brother's house is right about there. And now the trees have grown up quite a bit, but you can still see the tower because it's about 8, 9 stories high. And right about here, there's a cylinder that commemorates about 76 people that died in a tornado in the early 1900s, right after this probably, and was one of the biggest tornado deaths, of the times. I mean, it was a very famous thing. The other thing, just real quick, and I told this to Roger one day, my historical side of institutions. So one day this spring, I started here, and may have even seen Roger that day. Started here, then went to, after work, went to Sauk Center facility that was closed a few years ago and now looks like a big ghost town. And was there and actually stopped inside one of the buildings. It seemed to be a little bit open, so stopped inside there and found some interesting things in there. And I ended the evening about midnight on campus there, and the facility had most of the lights on. It reminded me that the facility was back in the 40s, the 50s, or whatever, whereas there's just maybe 100 people in that whole campus. So it was kind of a neat day just to see the different facilities, and
Well, and the architecture of the Fergus one,
it's incredible.
Kirkbride architecture is amazing.
They're trying to save that. In fact, if you will take over that facility right now, they will give you, what, $700,000-800,000, just because it's going to cost you so much to do something with it and to keep it up.
It's starting funds only going.
And I think you could push them probably for $1 million or so, but but it's a really, really neat spot, and how it over the skyline of Fergus, it's really an incredible sight. I had started out at the Fergus Falls State Hospital before coming down here, and so that gave me a good background in starting here. So, do I get any more pictures? Am I going to kick me out here?
I'm sure you have main building coming down, little action shot thing.
Well, the action shot, first thing I'm thinking is that was right about where the switchboard was, where I found the guy. The very first time I interviewed, in this first spot here. And the other thing that Norbert had told me was one of the last people living on campus was like a business manager that lived at this second level until he died in about mid-60s, 64, 65, right there. And then they turned that over to, well, at one point it was the personnel office,
Well,
but
actually,
classroom.
it was a home economics area for when I came.
And I can't imagine, because I stepped out there a few times at personnel, you probably had one of the best views of not just campus, but of the town.
Yeah.
And it was really,
Farmfields.
yeah,
Did you do that? Did you step out there? Did you go out there?
No.
really neat, really neat. One last thing, there was kind of a neat, there was a garage down here. Remember the garage that was under there?
Well, there was
For a long time.
There was actually a road that took a very steep slant.
And for many years, you could see the garage door under there, but they had so many varmints that get through and would get into, the main itself, that they finally had taken that out.
Well, and it was not really usable because it was a narrow door for the, I don't know if a modern car would hardly even fit.
And it was in this area that I found a number of the records that I was able to turn over to Roger. The most interesting, was, of course, the death, back to the first one in 25. And you can go back to the cemetery, and it was a little tougher before they put the new headstones on. But you could find the exact spot of, there was like one person the first few years, so.
What about storms? You kind of mentioned the tornado down in Fergus Falls. Do you remember any big storms around here? We had those couple tornadoes in the last decade.
Yep. Well, the one that hit the hospital area, I was sitting at the Fergus Falls bar. Our Cambridge softball team had gone up to play up in Fergus, and we're watching Cambridge. We just left there a couple hours before. We're watching, right through the state hospital here, grounds, or right to the edge. We were lucky. What I remember most about the storms, besides having to go to the tunnels, and things like that, in a big storm,
Which really doesn't sound like it would be any big deal, but.
Moving a large group of people that don't want to be moved, some, virtually no way am I going there, could be tough. But the thing that
Plus, if you're claustrophobic at all, you get down there with tons of other people
would be the blizzards though, and the people that would work for.
Three shifts,
Could be,
4 shifts.
yeah, it could end up being days. And the camaraderie and making sure people, obviously they still need their meds, they need their food, the whole thing. And so, that's a lot of time to be working, and people would get in by snowmobiles or whatever way they could. And some would work, like Roger said, 3-4 shifts, and you know, maybe he would just sleep, you know, in the basement or whatever, and you know, that kind of thing was really a neat side of it. Do I get any other pictures? Even if you're closing up shop?
Well, I was gonna show you this other one that you'd seen before, but I hadn't shown Tisha actually. You like so well.
With the pond and stuff? 'Cause I'd never seen that one.
No, and that's, let me see. How do you leave this room?
That was really neat. And the key there was, you know, and I should have noticed it right away, I'm disappointed in myself.
Can you tell where this was taken? It's actually way on Delwood with Telford Lens, which, so this is actually a city post from that trail.
Yeah.
And then it was through the trees, but yeah, the trick is, and this was just before the building came down, because the flags are already gone.
You'd always know, well, like you do anywhere, if, you know,
Hey, we
Figured
found those
it.
flags, the last ones to fly over the main building, they're out at the Historical Society.
well, that's
I
tremendous.
didn't know that.
That's tremendous. Yeah, I'd asked Roger a number of times, well, this is, you said it was a city pole, but I'd asked and you said, that, did they get those up?
They look
They
great.
look fabulous, you should drop by.
I would like to see that, I would like to see the exhibit, and now your son's exhibit is still there for another few weeks.
Months, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Of course, as soon as you can get there, the better. They can drop by a couple times.
Exactly.
And bring other people.
I did mention a few other names in the back, and I believe it is Ken Wickland, was the guy that, when the person was stabbed, what was it, late 50s, 1960, with John, that Ken was the guy, he told me,
He's still around?
I don't know, he hadn't probably,
He was old when we talked to him 10 years ago.
he was about 75, and so he's gonna be right in there, but whenever I'd hear somebody who had worked in the old days, I'd ask him, and when I asked him about, he had worked in the building where this guy had been stabbed, he said, oh yeah, he said, I was the guy that ran over, the OD or the supervisor wouldn't come over, so I ran over, and he said that either the guy died in his arms or, you know, whatever, and just kind of the, you know, the older history. We talked about Ed Platt, you know, I don't know how much to rank here, but, you know, his 46 years probably puts him at the longest of anybody that's ever worked out here. And it almost would put him back to, you know, what's 46 years from 10 years, you know?
Yeah, probably 40s. We actually talked to Sylvia Lude, who was 97 years old.
And
Sharp as a tack. She
And-
worked out here in the early 40s.
tremendous.
And remembers when everything was built. She was a waitress downtown. And her joke that she remembered was, if you saw a new car driving down the street, you'd say to the next person, that person must work at the state hospital, because that's where the money was.
Well, he is the biggest employer for how many years? You know, there's so many things. You know, during the 40s, the facility was rigged for, you know, the lights to go out in case they were ever bombed.
Air raid siren?
Yeah, I mean, they had all that, and so it's been fun. There's a number of people, you know, Roger would be at the top of the list, but the Norberts and some of the people now, Steve Boland and myself, that like to keep the history part going. You know, most has been forgotten, but there's a lot of neat stuff with this. And I bet if you ever went back and talked to Norbert again, but had a list again, Norbert's the kind of guy that I think you could meet with 2-3 times and still not.
Yes. He won't volunteer things necessarily.
One of the things I told I'd ask Roger is, was he here the day that JFK had been shot? I don't know, I just asked him. And he said, yeah, he rode home at noon on his bike like he always did, and found out, I think right before coming back. And then the campus had found out, and he said everything was absolutely still that day. It was just like all the staff. And back then in '63, most of the clients were still, you know, not as severe and profound as we had served. So, you know, he said it was just...
That every radio was on, and
He's-
television.
He said, yes, that nobody really was outside or anything. Yeah, everybody, I'm sure, was glued to the TV because, you know, information was so hard to come by. But he just said he could just remember that moment, and
I was a
wow.
freshman in college.
And I bet you remember where you were.
I was studying for a biology test.
They let us out of first grade or second, and I got home and I kept thinking, it's great we got out of school early, but why? Met my mom at the door. She was a school teacher. She shouldn't be home yet, and she's just bawling. So, that's how I found out, right at the door.
See, even you remember at that young age.
Oh,
It's the traumatic things we remember,
well, from 9/11 to, that day out here was similar to that. Everybody was glued, but now you get everything on TV, and because it started around 8, people hadn't gone to work, and it was that same thing.
I was doing my time book, doing everybody's time book, actually. One of my favorite tasks. Now, do you have to still do time books, or are they getting automated for you to still have to do?
No, we still do them, and once they're on computer, we'll continue to.
Yeah.
Was there any other last names? I think,
No, I think I know all of those.
some will be helpful, some won't, some will give you.
Vesta must be up there in years now, too.
But she's continued to work. She works like different group homes and things. So let's say she's about 70.
Okay, I would have put her
She'll give you more of the,
direct care.
yeah, and then some.
Merlin Johnson, remember that name? You worked with Merlin, I ran into him
Just a little.
months ago.
Good guy.
Yeah, so I was thinking he might have some interest in.
Colleen said Mona Nagy as I was leaving. Richard Hooker just retired from the state. Again, you've got Ann's number. I think she could. And of course, I had showed the files to Yvonne Lind or whatever. Did you see her looking at talking to her?
I've tried a number of times, but Donnie's really
Ill.
ill, and he has people coming in
Okay.
all day. She just said, not right now.
Yeah.
So-
But I know she's very interested, and when she looked at the file, I've
She
tried.
said, she could probably guess this, something about what your one big